This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show. Once again, I am your host, Tim Flattery. And have you ever been watching a sports movie or a TV show that has sports elements in it? And all of a sudden, while they're playing a game, you realize that the actors that are in the movie or in the show, they don't actually know how to play the sport that they're supposed to be pretending to be playing on the show or the movie. And it just totally ruins the movie for you. I know that's happened for me when I watch, Remember the Titans was that way for me. The football TV show Friday Night Lights was that way for me. When the actors can't actually be believable athletes, it just totally ruins it. And on the flip side, when you see an actor that is a believable athlete, it totally elevates that show or that movie as well. We've seen that with Kevin Costner time and again with Bull Durham for Love of the Game, Field of Dreams. We saw that with Charlie Sheen in Major League. He was a really believable pitcher. We saw it with Denzel Washington and He Got Game. And that is the topic that we are talking about in this week's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And our moonlighter for this week is a guy by the name of Ben Ahlers, who is a professional actor, a thespian, if you will, and he lives out in New York City. He's probably most commonly known for his role in the NBC show The Village, which was on for a couple of seasons. And Ben, he's from Fort Dodge, and you know how we love Fort Dodge guys here on the Moonlight Graham Show. Ben, his next big show that he has coming out was actually released yesterday on the new streaming platform Quibi. Have you heard of Quibi? It's been all over the place on the internet and on TV commercials right now. Quibi, it stands for Quick Bites. And they just launched their new streaming service yesterday. And Ben is starring in one of the new shows for this new streaming service. The show is called When the Streetlights Go On. It also stars Queen Latifah is like the main star that I've seen from it. I can't wait to dive into this. So Ben is starring in this show. He plays a basketball player or an ex-basketball player in the show. He's only 23 years old. And even though he's only 23, Ben has already played a basketball player. He's played a baseball player a couple of times, a swimmer, a football player. So far, he's been playing a lot of athletes. And I thought it would be interesting to get him on the podcast to talk about the nuances, how to play an athlete in a show or in a movie, and the similarities between, getting ready for a role and getting ready for a big game. Because like I mentioned before, Ben was a really fantastic athlete in high school. He played all of the sports. He played baseball, basketball, swimming, football, tennis. And at the same time, he was not one of these guys that was just a jock. So while he was doing all of the sports, he was also heavily involved in choir. He was heavily involved in musical and theater. And after high school, Ben went on to the University of Michigan Theater Arts program, which apparently is the best program in the country. And he was kind of recruited out of Michigan to go out to New York City and to start his professional acting career. So he actually left college early, similar to athletes, to start his professional acting career. And so it was interesting to talk about that too, because we know in sports a lot of times we hear how scouts are noticing high schoolers or noticing college athletes to draft them into the professional ranks. And it was interesting to talk about how that works for acting and theaters and Hollywood and all that. And Ben has got a great perspective on that as well. He is really an up-and-coming actor right now, so it's fun to get him on the podcast at this stage in his career, because not only is When the Streetlights Go On going to be a big show here, but he also has a couple of really big shows in the hopper that are going to be coming out over the next year here, or going to start filming and going to be coming out over the next year. And he's going to be a big deal, and he's going to be a face that you will be recognizing on the silver screen and on your TV screens here for years to come. And so I will have to put a little disclaimer out there. We had to do a little bit of editing. You're going to hear a couple of beeps actually in this episode, because some of the stuff that we talk about has not been released publicly, and it's We're talking about big studios, big networks here. So we had to bleep a couple of things out so as not to get Ben in too much trouble. But I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode of the Moonlight Graham Show with Moonlighter Ben Ahlers. And if you like what we're doing here on the Moonlight Graham Show, make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe to the Moonlight Graham Show and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We love hearing from you each and every week. So enjoy this week's episode with Moonlighter Ben Ahlers. This week's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show is brought to you by the People's Company. That's right, they are back as a sponsor because so often I hear from farmers throughout Iowa and throughout the Midwest who are listening to the podcast while they are planting, while they are harvesting. They're in their tractors, they're in their combines, which makes the People's Company a perfect partner for the Moonlight Graham Show here. As you guys probably well know, the People's Company is based in West Des Moines, Iowa, but they've really grown to be one of the nation's leading providers in land brokerage, land management, land appraisal, and investment services. These guys, and I know Andrew Zelmer and Matt Adams over there at the People's Company, these guys live and breathe farmland, farm management, and they know that industry better than anybody. So if you're looking to buy a farm, sell a farm, having an auction coming up, call the People's Company. They are the best in the business. Check them out at peoplescompany.com. We got a New Yorker in the house tonight. Our second New Yorker that we've had on the podcast. Ben Ahlers is here in studio. Ben, thanks for joining the Moonlight Graham Show.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm a huge podcast fan. Anybody who knows me who's listening to this knows that all I do is listen to podcasts, so I'm really glad to be here.
What are your go-to pods? Outside of the Moonlight Graham Show, of course.
Outside of the Moonlight Graham Show, of course. You Made It Weird with Pete Holmes.
Yes,
Armchair Expert. Sam Harris's, Rogan. Quite a few others. Andrew Schultz, Charlemagne the God have a great one. It's endless. It's endless.
You know, I was on Pete Holmes for a while, and I after a while I had to give it up because they go on so many tangents with Pete Holmes. And if you don't know Pete Holmes, he's a stand-up comic. He had an HBO show out there for a while. He's a really, really funny guy. But he's just kind of a goofy interviewer.
Yeah, and you can also just get burnt out listening to the same voices all the time. But again, luckily, there's almost infinite content. I don't know the numbers on podcasts, but sometimes people tout them out. That it's
You'll never find the end of it. And somebody's starting a new podcast every day.
Yeah. But so I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Ben, I was looking at your IMDb profile here, right? My first thing I thought of, though, is like this guy from Fort Dodge, right? Ben Ahlers, who I saw you grew up. We always would go to church together growing up, and you and your sister would be just a couple pews away from my family. And I thought, how cool is it that Ben Ahlers has an IMDb page? God. So what was it like when you first saw, man, I got it. I got my own IMDb page.
This whole thing is just, I'm just waiting for somebody to wake me up. First of all, I was like, I didn't realize that people cared enough to create one for me. I'm very flattered.
Yeah, who makes that?
I don't know. I think it's just if you get a credit on a TV show, or multiple TV shows, you just manifests itself.
Yeah, I'm sure IMDb is a company.
Yeah,
and so there's some intern there that's going through the credits for everyone.
God, and there's so much content out right now. They must have a really busy workload. But yeah, I actually. My mom is a big Googler. she probably Googles my name twice a day just to see if there's anything coming out, and she was the first one to point it out to me. But it'll be good to look back on it because I'm sure a lot of the people that I meet almost forget some of the stuff that they've done, and so to have just this running list of everything.
Right. Oh my God, I can't believe I was in Anna Garcia Does a One-Woman Play. What was that? Like how... The title is Anna Garcia Does a One-Woman Play. Oh, so man. What role would you play if she's doing a one-woman play?
I played myself. Oh. My first IMDb credit was myself. Anna Garcia, shout out if she's listening to this, was a senior my sophomore year of college, and she was a screen and arts cultures major. So she, for her senior thesis, she had to write, direct, and produce, and she decided to star in her own movie, which was about her putting together a one-woman show, and it was almost this Office mockumentary style short that she was interviewing me to figure out what the theme of her one-woman play should be, and it was like 2 minutes, but I forgot about that.
It's on
See,
your
I already
page.
forgot. Thank you for reminding me.
So growing up, you're a Fort Dodge guy like myself.
Yeah.
And you were in the arts, obviously singing, acting, but you're also an athlete.
Yeah.
In high school. So what type of athlete were you?
I did just about everything. I have a problem with not being able to sit still. I can't sit around and watch TV too much. So I overextended myself. And so in high school, I did my freshman year, I played football, I swam, did track, and then I was going to play baseball, but at that point I decided I needed to use my summers for music. The following year, I quit swimming because that is
5 a.m. practices.
Oh my God. We had distance day where it was just you swam as far as you could for 5 hours and then reloaded the 20,000 calories you burned. So I went back to basketball, which I played all the time at St. Ed's with the culture over there. So
Yep.
I went back to playing basketball. So football, basketball, tennis, and a little bit more track.
Man, you did do it all then.
Yeah, and then I played traveling. Baseball was my main one growing up, and I actually kind of diverted away from acting for the longest time because traveling baseball just took up all the time from like 6 to 14. But I got after it.
What were you best at?
I would say football and tennis. I would say football and tennis. Tennis probably from a skill set standpoint, but just in terms of the way I was able to fill a role on the football team as a tight end and special teams guy at senior high in Fort Dodge was I was pretty proud of the work I was able to do there.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's been a good run of Fort Dodge football teams over the last 10 years or so. They've done really. You were part of kind of the front end of that.
Yeah, well, it started off with like Levi Peters,
the great
even
Levi
Jerry
Peters.
Ellenson, and those guys. Levi Peters coming in out of where was he before?
He was from
that?
Twin River Valley. You guys recruited him out of there.
Yes.
Who says public schools don't recruit?
Exactly. Dowling is in Fort Dodge. We're in the same camp there. So Levi and those guys he was a senior my 8th grade year when I was still at St. Ed's, and I transferred to senior high my freshman year. And we made the playoffs 3 of my 4 years that I was there. And for us to be able to compete, given the size differential,
right,
with some of these Des Moines schools is something that I'm still really, really proud of. We got after it, and we cared about the responsibility we had to the community, and we cared about each other, and we also just had a great time, man.
Fort Dodge is one of those towns that really rallies around their high school still to this day. And so if you have a good wrestling team, a good basketball team, good football team, whether it's at St. Edmund or at Fort Dodge High, the whole town will rally around it. It's kind of a cool thing.
Truly. And what's also so cool about Fort Dodge, because I just did a Christmas concert back there to raise some
money.
Heard
about that. That was a big deal.
Yeah,
that was a tough ticket to get.
Yeah, people were giving me flack for the ticket prices, and I was saying, I'm not keeping any of it. It's a fundraiser, but I'm giving you something for it. It was the coming home. It was, what was it now? Home for Christmas.
Oh, that's
with Ben Ahlers.
Yeah, who do you think you are, Bing Crosby?
Exactly. I didn't know. I just had to bite the bullet on that one. But what's so cool about Fort Dodge is that we rally around. St. Ed's basketball gym is packed during basketball season, and we were selling out home football games with senior high. But we also just have this thriving culture throughout the town too, where you can start a symphony concert on December 1st, and then close it out on December 21st with a concert from a guy in New York. There's just so many opportunities for any interest in that town, and I'm baffled at how lucky we were to grow up there.
There's always this joke, and we've had obviously a lot of Fort Dodgers here on the podcast, right?
Right.
And there's this joke among people from Fort Dodge that all roads lead back to Fort Dodge. Like anybody from Fort Dodge, they'll find a connection back to Fort Dodge. And that's kind of, the different people we've talked to who have spread out around the country from Fort Dodge, that always comes up. In your time at Michigan, where you went to college, or out in New York, have you ever run into somebody who knew where Fort Dodge was?
I just got back from Vancouver about a month ago. I was working on a show up there called for Netflix, and my costume designer used to show horses in Waverly, and they're from Vancouver, and so they would drive across the country, and they would always stop at Tom Thumb and Fort Dodge.
Oh, there you go.
Which is just insane. And then also Steve Stark,
yeah,
the president of I forget his exact title over at MGM, huge bigwig at MGM in LA. He's
related to the Starks from Fort Dodge,
right? Graduated in the late 70s from senior high.
Yeah.
And when I was out in LA, I was out there over the summer doing a play out there, and my lawyer used to be a studio exec, and so he and Steve are best friends, and so I got to go meet Steve and bond over.
Wow.
He lived over by Fieldhaver, and I lived by Fieldhaver. It's just insane, man.
I heard a story about, and I think it's Steve Stark. Like Steve Stark, I think I got him right, is one of the guys that invested in My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know if it's him, but it's a Fort Dodge guy, and knowing he's a big time guy out in Hollywood, it's got to be him.
Oh yeah,
They're
of course.
They couldn't get that project off the ground, so it was an independent movie. They ended up making $1 billion or something like that, and I think Steve Stark, hit it big with My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
So there you have it.
There you go.
Fort Dodge,
like I said,
it gets the credit for My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
So often you see it in like high school musicals or the way people portray high school in music. There's always this separation of jocks and people in the arts, actors and musicians. And I went to a smaller high school. We've referenced it a couple of times. St. Ed's. I had like 65 kids in my class. So if you want to have a school that's successful at anything, everybody's got to do everything.
Right.
So at St. Ed's, everybody was in choir, everybody was in the musicals, everybody was in all of the sports. Right. But at the bigger schools, and Fort Dodge High is about 5 times the size of St. Edmund, you don't see that as much. But you mentioned earlier with all the sports that you played, and also, you really made a name for yourself in music and on stage. Right. How were you able to balance all of that? And was it hard to kind of fit into different cliques?
It was. First of all, I have to give you and your cohort and your family and that whole environment at St. Edmund the credit for you guys were the model for that being possible. I know, again, St. Ed's was a different, setup, and that was almost expected in order.
We didn't do it as well as you did, Ben.
Well, but what I'm saying is that I remember my dad having conversations. He's like, that Tim Flattery, he's a good one to try to model yourself after. You were in you were in chamber choir.
Oh yeah, who wasn't, baby?
Exactly.
That's how you picked up the girls.
I was staying up way too late watching you nail those last 2 free throws in the semifinals down in Vets. St. Edmund, especially your generation, was really inspiring in that way. And so that's actually why I thought that that's just how you did high school. So when I got to senior high and I saw people specializing or people not biting off more than they can chew, I thought that they were the abnormalities because of the people I grew up inspired by. So first of all, thank you for that.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
But second of all, my family was super, super supportive in everything that I did, and was also able to help carry some of the load and getting me to places. Bouncing
you can't
around
do it without them.
Bouncing around as much as we had to. But I did have a hard time with some of the clique stuff. Especially early, before I'd kind of come into my own and had some self-confidence about who I was, because I felt like, and it's it's the classic High School Musical Troy Bolton sort of thing, but with in the sports world, I was the kid who occasionally had to miss, whether it was a summer workout or I had to have someone drive me home early from our Friday night game so I could get to sleep for all state auditions the next day.
Yep.
There was this weird disjunct fitting into
our tight end's a choir kid.
Exactly.
Or
like me saving my voice.
Yeah.
And not being as rowdy on the sideline and how that could come across as selfish or disinterested or whatnot. And then on the other side of the aisle, when you're in the choir room, you represent
the jocks.
And there's justified angst toward that demographic of people, and so for a while there it was a little lonesome. Luckily I had some friends that valued the same things that I did and were multi-sport athletes and were into the arts as well. Brian Merman won state tennis as a in doubles, but also was a 4-year all-stater with me. So he was a good rock to lean on, but for a while there it was tough. But it was I'm so grateful for it because that adjustment period is just as valuable as arriving anywhere. Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, high school is a weird time in general. And then you throw in like the different dynamics of people trying to fit into friend groups, and it just becomes really challenging in that regard because high school can be brutal on its own.
Oh, man. But I will say, without those communities, regardless of how volatile they may have been at times, I don't know how you get through that. I really don't, especially in a huge, swirling hurricane of a 1,200 person school, as opposed to the 300 or 240 person school that I was, growing up.
Yeah. So now that you're in New York City,
right.
You're involved in like this arts community, this acting community, this Broadway community, whatever it is. I don't know how you'd label it.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of people like you that were, really well balanced as kids, and they played all these sports or athletic, or, were they all Juilliard kids from the get-go?
It's a pretty good mix. I will say that I think I'm really proud of being from Iowa, and I'm really proud of being, this athlete, because I do, and just someone with a lot of interests, because I do think that tends to be a little bit against the grain. A lot of the kids I went to school with went to performing arts high schools, or, have been tap dancing since they were 6, and my first ballet class was the first class of my freshman year of college. But I found that, especially as I've started to divert my attention to a lot of the straight acting sort of stuff, whether it's on TV and film or on in stage plays, that having that perspective of different ways of living your life and having exposure to the different types of people that I've come in contact with really aid me. That when you've only been around the theater kid, or you've only been in tap class, there's a narrow-mindedness that's kind of really hard to broaden. But I mean, Derek Klena is a lead of the new Alanis Morissette musical, Jagged Little Pill.
Yes, I heard about that.
And he was a pitcher at UCLA.
Huh.
There's a Broadway softball league that I've never been in town for, and I've never been on Broadway. We have, hopefully in the near future. But I'm going to piggyback on Derek's team and for Jagged Little Pill's team for this summer. And so we'll see. I'll get a better sense of where the athletes are lying.
Yeah, there's got to be like a subsection of athlete roles out there, right?
Yeah.
That you actually, not only do you need to look like an athlete, but you got to know you need to carry yourself like an athlete. And you see some of these movies, like baseball movies, football movies, it's always like a huge turnoff when the guy can't throw,
right,
or when the guy like is just not running like an athlete would run. Right. So it's got to be something that would be right in your wheelhouse, right?
And sports are so dramatic, and we love movies about them, and we're going to keep making movies about them. And so to have that kind of in my toolbox, I'm really, really grateful for. But I actually just something I worked on in September, I played a guy named Brad Kirchhoff
in Walk Off.
No, that was a baseball movie that I produced.
Because I do want to talk about that.
Yes, let's talk about it. But I just filmed When the Streetlights Go On in Vancouver, and I played a basketball, and I had to play basketball. And it was pretty clear, and I won't, people, I'm so grateful for whoever was there and whoever was participating, but it was pretty clear that some people had never been on the basketball court before.
Yeah, so is that hard? Is that hard acting with like somebody that can't dribble?
It can be, yeah. Luckily, I was the only one dribbling, and my co-star was the one guarding me, and he knew how to play. But I'm really grateful for that, because I cannot wait. I cannot wait for the next Remember the Titans, because I'm going to be the first one knocking on the casting office's door to try to get in that room.
You'll be was it Ryan Gosling?
I would love to be
the bad defensive back in that one.
Yost.
Yeah, he had the psycho dad, psycho racist dad, and he couldn't understand why Ryan Gosling was not being played, and the black kid was getting played over him.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, how old are you, Ben? 24, 23? You're just 23 years old, and you've already played a basketball player in When the Lights Go On.
Yes.
When the Street Lights Go On.
Yes, coming out in April.
And then we mentioned earlier, your latest IMDb credit is called Walk Off.
Yeah.
And you play a baseball star, high school baseball star in this movie, and you're, dealing with father-son issues. And I looked everywhere on the internet. I could not find this. So how do I watch that movie?
We're still sitting on it because we're going through the film festival circuit right now. It was actually, I collaborated in the creation of it with a couple of buddies of mine at school right before I had left. I actually left school to work on the NBC show The Village, but we were still filming, and so I was flying back and forth from New York to Ann Arbor to finish this project.
Wow.
But yeah, a buddy of mine is a filmmaker. We'd worked throughout college, and he texted me at the end of junior year, and he just said, "Hey, I'm working on this script, and it has to be you. Would you be interested in doing it in the fall?" And I said, "Yeah, but let me take a look at the script. Let's work it out." And it was something that I really connected with. It was this. It's a 20, 30-minute film. I think it'll eventually be on Vimeo. I'm not sure what streaming platform we're going to launch it through once we get through the circuit. But it's about this son, this baseball star, who starts to realize that this isn't going to be his life. He's not going to go to college to play college baseball. He's not going to be the professional athlete that he and his dad always, dreamt he would be. And now he's to the point where he doesn't know what to do, because that's been his entire identity. And we were talking before the show kind of about that struggle. And by the end of the movie, it's not really a spoiler, but I don't think, and my character's name was Ben, I don't think Ben has any idea what he wants to do after this or who he is, but he's starting the path to trying to find that, which is a hard place to get to, especially when you've been one thing for so long.
So the hard part about sports movies, and I'm curious if you've run into this with Walk Off or When the Streetlights Go On, is it's really hard to walk the line. You mentioned Remember the Titans, between cheesy and authentic and powerful. Right. And like, as I've grown older, I view Remember the Titans more as cheesy. Yeah. It's like Disney cheese rather than like this impactful story about race and all this other stuff where it's like, oh, that got Disneyfied. Right. And so in the two projects that you've had so far, we've had to play an athlete. Have you noticed that? I've been so fortunate. I actually also played in The Closet, which is a play. I played a baseball player, so I've actually got to do it 3 times now in like a year and a half, which is just crazy. But Walk Off was the only project that was sports centric. The other 2, I was an athlete, and there were clips of me, but the majority of the plot didn't have anything to do with it. But I've been really fortunate in every instance to play real people who are going through real situations, and framed within the context of being an athlete or being a high school kid in general. It's a real tough line though, because one thing that I've realized is the amount of moving parts that go into creating a TV show or a movie is so exorbitant that the fact that anything is palatable, let alone good, is a miracle. And I'm so astonished and grateful for the amount of content that we have at our fingertips. It's really, really good. Because here's the thing. You write the script, then you have to find actors who are able to embody those characters in a very authentic way. The director has to make sure every setup is exactly right. The lighting has to be perfect, and then you have to edit it and add the score, and all of these independent parts have to come together perfectly to then be distributed to an audience who may just not like it. And so there's almost a let go and let God when it comes to all of that, where you just have to pick the parts in the projects that you resonate with on the page and the people that you want to work with, and then leave the rest up to the fates in that way. Are you already at a point in your career where you can pick and choose like that?
To a degree. My friend Kiernan told me, she has a saying, it's like you're too young and too good to be too picky. Now is the time to kind of start to take those risks.
To explore a little bit.
To explore. I mean, be in a bad... I got this AMC Stubbs pass when I moved to New York, where I get to see like 3 free movies a week. And now that the financial burden of not having to pay $20 for movie tickets off my chest, I'm able to go see all of the movies. And what's been so liberating about that, or what has been so liberating to me about that, is that I'm starting to see actors that I respect in a bad movie, and realizing that it's no indictment of them, and that I know that they'll do something good later. So to limit yourself for the fear of, not
critical acclaim,
acclaim in every shot you take is, I try to make sure that I don't get too heady about that. But I am at a point where, this part doesn't seem to resonate with me, and I feel like it wouldn't be fulfilling, and I would much rather go on a vacation with my family to Montana or go to my sister's graduation than get too caught up in the rat race, when at the end of the day it is just a job. And if you don't hold that line, then you can get burnt out.
Yeah, and as you know, with this show, we talk a lot about role players, right? We're the underdogs and the role players.
Right.
That's what we are on Moonlight Graham, and part of acting, I got to imagine, is fully understanding your role. I mean, obviously, everybody has a role, and it's a little less clear in sports because everybody kind of wants their role to be the star sometimes.
Right.
But I got to imagine that translates over to acting as well. It's like, do you ever see people, or have you found yourself doing it where you're playing like a minor character, a backup character? You're not the star, but you're doing it or somebody else is trying to be the star. They're trying to take over the scene and not really understanding how they fit.
I can definitely speak to my own ego getting in the way of the necessary function I have to fulfill in a story. Even if, for example, there's been times where I've been the leads of shows, and in a given scene, I've decided that I'm going to be the star of this scene when it's actually about my mom, and it's more important for me to set the ball than to spike it in this situation. But there's just something so exhilarating about spiking it that I start to throw the whole system off. So I think an awareness that I got in sports of, just because you're not running the fly route, sometimes you're going to have to just like block down for this, sweep to the right as a tight end. That's just as important to the bigger picture of what you're trying to do as a team. An acting troupe is a team, and I think that going back to your question about if there's a lot of people who have played sports, I don't really know the numbers on that, but I think that a lot of people would have been better served if this is something that they're interested in, having team building or team activities throughout their life, because you start to that awareness is just ingrained in you.
Yeah. I love that word, the awareness, right? The awareness of where you fit on a team and how a team functions, and the humility of being a good member of the team, I think is so important in any area of life.
Coach Miller, the football coach at senior high, always said, keep the main thing the main thing.
Ooh, I love that.
And he said that especially during homecoming week, because
when everybody's trying to party and pick up chicks,
and when half the homecoming court is on the football team, and they've got to go to all the events and dress up and ride on the car downtown Fort Dodge. He said, keep the main thing the main thing, and our main thing was Friday night. And I've tried to apply that to my job on stage or in the movie. It's like the main thing is this. It's not me. It's
That's really good.
The bigger thing.
So of course the story of like Midwestern kid moving to LA or moving to New York City, it's a tale as old as Secret of My Success. Michael J. Fox, of course, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean though? Like, how do you go from Fort Dodge, Iowa to University of Michigan to New York? Like, how does that process work? Because in sports, like, you understand there's a draft, or you sign a professional contract, you move up the minor leagues, then you're on the team. Right. But it's much more ambiguous in the arts, in like where people fit in and what's the route to the top, or what's the route to the goal that I want to get to. How have you navigated that sea?
Well, and we were talking about this before the podcast, before I started recording. Because it's so ambiguous, and because we're so obsessed with like systems and the draft, or you go to the camp,
this level and then that
this level XYZ, it becomes so frustrating, and there's almost a sense of injustice to anybody in the field that they have such little control over that, and that there's no rhyme or reason to it. And so I take extreme. I'm extremely grateful and humbled by the fact that I really don't think I had any control over where I've landed at this point. I'm just a product of the circumstances and experiences that I've had, and the universe has just kind of unfolded in the way that it has. And I assume an obligation to use that privilege to work really hard at what I can.
But did you know you were going to New York City out of college? Or did you have a connection there? Or how did that actually happen?
Okay, so logistically with my life, because it's going to be specific to whoever it is.
Right.
I did some summer camps in high school. I did the singing thing. I did the musicals in school. I did some summer camps in high school where I met a casting director who's hired by a creative team to assemble a pool of actors to audition for the certain roles. She had gone to the University of Michigan. And when I was 15, she pulled me aside and she said, Ben, just to let you know, people do this for a living, and I think that you're good enough to do it. So that was the first...
That had to be a big moment.
Oh, my God. I mean, because we're so... we're so disillusioned in Iowa to what any of that world is.
Oh, yeah.
That I literally thought that if you wanted to be an actor, you just had to move there when you were 18 and just figure it out. I didn't know people went to school for musical theater.
I'm just learning this now, Ben.
Right. Yeah. And musical theater schools are everywhere. And I didn't realize that until I had that conversation. Yeah. She and I kept in touch over my 4 years in high school. And she actually ended up writing my letter of recommendation to the University of Michigan, which is, the #1 musical theater program in the country. There's 22 of us each year, and we spend 4 years learning how to sing, act, and dance. During the summers, I worked at some small regional theaters just trying to get my toolbox, as packed as I could. And then the end of my junior year, a casting director from her office, but a different one, came to school to give a master class. And I was chosen as one of the students to work with him in front of the department on some material that he had provided for us. And he and I really gelled and got along. And I got an email from him the next day saying, there's a role out here in a new play with Matthew Broderick to play his son at the Williamstown Theater Festival. I think you'd be great for it. Can you come out next week to audition? Flew to New York, auditioned, got it. And then from then on, because I had a credit under my belt, I was able to bring on my manager. I was able to bring on my agent, who have then been able to kind of guide me as they see fit and as the way my gut tells me to. And then when I went back to school, and so that was the summer after my junior year. When I went back to school in my senior year, I took a self-tape appointment, which is basically you just set up your phone and have someone stand on the other side of it and read the other person's lines while you're auditioning, and then you send that out to the casting directors. And I was given I earned the role of Liam Kelly in NBC's The Village, and I moved to New York in 4 days after I found out about that. Left school in October of my senior year, and from then on it's just been a full out sprint. And then opportunities create opportunities, and so on and so on.
So you left school early for this. You're like an athlete in that regard, then, right?
Yeah, and then luckily I had enough. I had a really great relationship with my department, and I worked my butt off in school to make sure I had the credits under my belt. So I was able to do some online classes through Iowa Central Community College.
Of course, I'm a Triton grad myself.
I guess I could say that I am as well. And I was able to walk in May with my class and do all of that from New York.
Nice.
And since then, I've been there in L.A. and Vancouver.
So Matthew Broderick, did you call him Ferris Bueller? I mean, did you trip over yourself a little bit because it's Matthew Broderick?
Oh man, the first few days I couldn't talk to him. I was just so nervous. The first scene that I had with him in the play that we were blocking or staging, I'm supposed to run across the stage and bear hug him. And I almost tackled him because I had no idea I had no body awareness because I was just so overwhelmed with the fact that one of my childhood heroes was playing my dad, and I was starting to call him a colleague. But then over the course of that rehearsal process, and then when we went up to Massachusetts to do the 4-week run of the show, he and I wouldn't even call him a mentor. I would just call him a really, really good friend. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about theater is that everyone just gets so tight. It was a 5-person cast. After the show would get done at 10 o'clock, we'd go up to his apartment, me and a couple other of the castmates, and we would cook food and watch, The Graduate until 2 a.m., sleep in, do the show again.
Wow.
It was just incredible.
So you said that Matthew Broderick was one of your heroes. I don't know if that was the word you used just a second ago.
Yeah.
But you're younger. You're 23 years old. What movies did you recognize Matthew Broderick from?
Oh, man.
I feel like that's more my generation and even older than me.
Yeah,
What was the War Games?
War Games.
Ferris Bueller.
Glory.
Glory, yeah.
The Freshman with Marlon Brando. Music Man, Inspector Gadget, all of them.
Yeah, Inspector Gadget.
Yeah,
that's
and
right. The producers.
The producers. And what was so cool was the play we did was this blaring French farce comedy. And to watch this comedic maestro play the audience the way he did was so informative, and there were times where I was worried that my mouth was open on stage just watching this masterwork.
One thing I think it's amazing about Broadway, but also, and I'm using Broadway to encompass all stage plays because I'm kind of a noob here, but they do it every night.
Yeah.
We get some off Broadway series things here in Des Moines, and they'll do Wednesday through Sunday shows, sometimes 2 a day on the weekends.
Yep.
And you're like, whoa, that really translates to like an athlete.
Yeah.
Right. In baseball, they're playing every day, and they got to do it every day. Put the uniform on, go through the routine, and go out there and put on a great show for the crowd. Right. That is very much like an athlete.
Yeah.
Right.
Truly.
In the entertainment sense. How hard was that to bring it every night?
It's really, really difficult. I've actually kind of going back to if I can be picky and choosy about what I do. The amount of work that it takes to do, especially musicals, and I've never done a professional musical, to some of my friends who are on Broadway right now doing 8 shows a week, but they have one day off, Monday, and usually that's just spent trying to recover for the next sprint. And the sacrifices they have to make to not eat dairy because it messes with their voice, to not eat gluten, no spicy food. Sometimes you don't talk during the day just so that you can sing at night. And then for the most part, that you make such less money than people in the TV and film world, because just for some reason, the salaries are just so out of whack that you have to really, really, really love it. You have to really love the project. You have to really love the people that you're with. And I've started to get a little picky in that sense, because just sometimes, man, it's really grinding. It's really grinding. But you're exactly right. Like an athlete, you have to determine a routine. When I was out in Pasadena, I was doing a play out there called Good Boys. And I played a football player in that. I forgot.
You're the resident athlete here.
Yeah, exactly. But I had to get up at 10 o'clock every day. I had to make sure that I had a workout in by 2, get a nap in by 4, and then my diet was the same, just so I could have 100% to do this sprint at 8 o'clock at night every night for a month. It's pretty incredible that people are able to do it as successfully as they can.
I'm surprised you haven't done more musicals yet.
Right.
Like, you are a great singer, and you go to anybody from Fort Size, like Ben Ahlers, like, oh, the singer.
Right.
They might say actor too, but you put on a concert when you're back, you cantor at church and everything, and you're really known for your voice. You have a great voice. Your most viewed things on YouTube are you singing.
Yeah.
Do you have a desire to use that tool?
I do, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I had actually forgotten about this. When I had gotten to the University of Michigan, I was always a singer. That was my identity, like you just mentioned, growing up. But when I got to the University of Michigan, I started to realize that I was a really good long distance runner in terms of my vocal ability, if we're going to apply it to athletics. But I was around vocal gymnasts when I got to school.
What do you mean by that?
People who could just do whatever they wanted with their voice at any time. That it proved to be really, really daunting for me. I got really self-conscious about the disparity that I started, real or not, between me and my peers. And instead of what I should have done was, instead of letting that motivate me to get in the practice room and to catch up in that way, what I decided was I was going to find my role. And my role was I was going to dive into the acting thing, because at that time I realized, we're all about at the same level when it comes to acting. So I'm going to really, dig in here to get ahead in this way.
So you didn't see yourself above and beyond with your vocal talent?
No.
Run of the mill.
And I think a lot of that is just self-deprecation and just letting doubts get to you and to overwhelm me, and I'm actually, that was one of my selfish objectives with the concert, was to reclaim that love and that strong sense of who I was growing up, because it was a vital part of me that kind of got that I kind of just threw away because of how overwhelmed I was by the impressive nature of my colleagues.
In your role, is there a certain way that you have to look? Like in sports, we know there's body types, right? Like to be a quarterback, you got to look like this. To be a point guard, you got to look like this. To play the line, you got to look like this. Like in your world, are people telling you, hey, you got to have the hair, you got to weigh 170 pounds, you got to, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No one is saying it because it can get so problematic as it does, especially for women in this industry.
Right.
I think more guys are opening up about some of the body standard, issues.
Yeah, there's not a lot of fat guys out there in lead roles.
There aren't.
Look at Chris Pratt, for instance. Like he was a really funny fat guy,
right.
And now that guy's like, well, he's whatever Marvel character he is, but he's unbelievably jacked.
Right. And I found that because of my athletic background and just because of my kind of natural way about myself, I'm a very confident person, or I can appear to be very confident. And so what I decided was that it would be more interesting if I was the smaller and more artsy I am in my physical stature, the more there is to play around with, instead of being a muscular athlete, rough guy. And I think that a lot of that is just in my head, and it's something that we all grapple with. But I'm looking forward to the time when I can make the transition into being like a 35-year-old action hero and just go all Tom Hardy MMA traps on everybody.
Right.
Because I miss eating as much as I used to in high school.
Yeah, do people talk about like, okay, Christian Bale or even Chris Pratt, or I mean, some of these guys that get so ripped, the Captain America guy, these guys are so ripped to the point where it's like, I don't know if that was all natural. Or people ever talking about that, like, okay, he did steroids or he did 4 rounds of HGH or.
I'm not in those circles enough to really know what's actually going on.
But do you have your own doubts?
I have my doubts about certain people in just in the turnaround, the quick turnaround.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're juicing up, they have to recover so quickly to be
Christian
able to do
Bale
what
went
they're
from
doing.
The Machinist to Batman.
I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. But I also know he's starting to come out and say he does not want to set the precedent. There was a Ford versus Ferrari interview with him and Matt Damon
both said it, because they've both done it a couple of times.
You don't have to do this. You can be an actor and
but isn't it a little
job.
Self-serving? I agree with them,
Right.
And I love both those guys as actors. I think Christian Bale, he's one of my favorite actors, but like they already did it. Now those guys are like pushing 50, right? And they did it when they were like more trying to make a name for themselves. Now they've got more money than they could ever do. And it's like, hey, whoa, come on, guys.
I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's like A-Rod coming out and saying like, yeah, you don't need to take steroids. Like, well, you won 3 MVPs doing it.
Right. Exactly. I can totally see that side of it. It's a tough balance. It's a really tough balance. I do know that, man, those Hemsworth brothers, regardless of what they're doing, if they're supplemented with anything, they've just got to live at the gym. And as you know, that takes a real toll on you, on your endocrine system and neurologically. And so being able to put the work in the way they are on the physical side, but then also be authentic, real human beings to where a camera can be 2 inches from their face and you actually believe that they're living a real situation. I respect the heck out of it regardless of what they're doing, because that's got to be just miserable.
Well, I remember hearing a story about Wahlberg when Wahlberg was trying to get that boxer movie where he was Mickey. The Fighter.
The Fighter.
He was trying to get
with
The Fighter
Tom
made.
Hardy and Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, and he was trying to get that made forever.
Oh, that's a different one with Christian
he was
Bale.
Christian Bale.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get that made forever, and he would bring a boxing ring to every movie set he was on so he could work out with his boxing coach and stay in that type of shape while he was and that was like 2 years of that.
Yeah.
And I remember like hearing that story. It's like, whoa, what was he doing? Like, and you think about, he was working out 4 hours a day doing that, but also doing his actual acting in movies on the side. Is like that takes a lot of dedication.
I'm sure have you heard Mark Wahlberg explain his day where he gets up at like 3 a.m. works out by and he still does that.
Yeah, Mark Wahlberg's like workout, daily mass. Like, I mean, he's really, really regimented.
Yeah.
He's a personal hero, Mark Wahlberg.
Totally. Me too. And I will say that I think that's another thing that sports gives you is because no one will call an actor a freelancer, but that's basically what we are. You know, you do these one-off projects and then go back to your normal life.
You don't have a business card.
You don't have a business card, and you also don't have external forces structuring your day. And there's something really liberating about that, but you can also do nothing very easily when you don't have a boss breathing down your neck for the 9 to 5. And so you really have to find those pillars of discipline and structure in order to make sure you're moving towards some sort of purpose. And I think that the really good ones like Mark Wahlberg, who hold that line and create that sort of day for themselves because that's what they think has to be done in order for them to do their job. I respect the heck out of that, and it really motivates me to do that early instead of waiting until I have $80 million to get my own private gym.
Do you think that was inherent with you, or do you think sports provided you that structure?
It was definitely sports that provided the structure, because I do remember the growing pains of getting up for a 6 a.m. Weightlifting session in high school. First couple of years, I didn't. I was the guy who found excuses, or but I have choir practice, so I can't burn myself out. Sometimes legitimate excuses, but it took me a long time to rise to the occasion of what it means to be a disciplined person. And I don't know if I would have been able to find that without sports.
On the other side of that, do you see other people in the acting world that you're in right now that don't have that sports background, that you see struggle with that freelancing nature of the industry?
I think because, like I was saying, this industry is so romantic that sometimes you miss the pragmatic realizations you have to make. And sports is so pragmatic.
Right.
And that you get the romance. You get running out of the tunnel and the lights on a Friday night. But you also realize the functional logistical steps you have to take in order to make the most of that situation. And without the intense, grind of whether it's high school or college sports, emphasizing that to you, I think you can just have these blind spots where you don't learn how to budget your money. You realize the importance of diet or having other interests or fostering a community, because you're so focused on being, having your name in the lights. Well, your name, first of all, the name in lights doesn't give you any value, as I've been really lucky to realize. I love it, but it doesn't make me feel any more whole.
Right.
And the problem is if you keep chasing that, one, you'll never get there because you haven't found the steps that it takes to get there. And two, once you get it, then you feel shorted that it didn't fill the holes you thought it would. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit that right on the head. But okay, you were on The Village.
Yeah.
NBC's The Village, and that was a big show. Like, they promoted that.
Yeah.
It's on NBC, right?
Yeah.
The Peacock.
Right.
What was, when you're on that show, what was like your Instagram DMs like the week after that? Like, do you get, all of a sudden you have a little bit notoriety, your face is in front of millions and millions of people on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden, are people reaching out to you? Are girls filling up your inbox and all that stuff?
Girls are, but what's surprising is that most of them are moms asking me to look at their daughter's Instagram.
Whoa, that's weird.
I've gotten quite a few of those in the comment section or in the DMs. I'm like, folks, you have no idea. I'm not British. When I posted my first video on my Instagram story of me speaking, people were freaking out. They didn't realize that I wasn't British. But also, my role was written so beautifully by Mike Daniels and Wolf Coleman, where all I had to do was just be endearing and supportive, because they made the perfect guy.
And so everybody can fall in love with you.
Yeah, and that's what happened. And if I wasn't able to do that, then I would have been a miserable failure, because it was on the page to be a great guy. But that doesn't mean that I am one. I try to be.
Right.
But this weird standard and expectation of who I am, that was a really weird realization. And sometimes even when I meet people in real life, I can see this expectation in their eyes of thinking that I'm,
But you're Liam.
Right, exactly. And that's been weird. Also another one, and I had heard about this, I didn't think it was real. Maybe it was like the Richard Gere thing, where you don't know about, where it's just rumors in the ethos.
Well, what's the Richard Gere thing?
Oh, I don't know if I can say it. There's a Richard Gere rumor. people can Google it. I don't
All
know
right.
if I can.
All right.
That's funny. I've gotten a couple messages asking if I would send pictures of my feet.
Oh, that's
and
weird.
They're willing to pay me money for it.
I didn't think like things like that were real, like
man.
Feet fetishes or like these certain things. And then I realized like they are, and I'm just so glad that I'm not like a feet guy. I guess. If there are feet guys, I'm glad I'm not one of them.
Totally, and more power to them. I think you should be able to do whatever you want. But man, that seems like such a fruitless pursuit.
They're just going to be feet, man.
Just
There's
feet.
nothing more that they can do for you.
No eyes, no depth. I mean, it's feet, it's toes and toenails. But no, people are willing to pay money for them. Luckily, I'm in a place financially where I don't have to stoop to that yet. But who's to say?
So do you respond to any of this stuff?
No. I asked Dominic Chinese, who played Enzo in The Village. I said, what do I need to know? And he said, groundedness doesn't just happen. It actually has to be a deliberate pursuit. You actually have to actively work against a lot of the forces and inputs coming in that are going to throw you off that track.
Yeah, the temptations.
Right? And, I don't think the River Phoenixes or the Heath Ledgers or any of these folks who have suffered the consequences of Hollywood and all of that, none of them chose that. Just whatever happened in their life made them more susceptible to a lot of the dangers and the vipers and all of that, the demons. And I have identified messaging people in the DMs, especially in that vein, as unnecessary and probably problematic. I will reach out, like if someone sends me a message saying.
Now that I think of it, I DM'd you. That's
did.
how we set this
exactly,
up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if someone's sending me something supportive or something asking for advice or whatever, I'm happy to respond. But
what about, you mentioned Matthew Broderick earlier? Starstruck. Have you been starstruck with anybody that you've run into?
Matthew, I was super, super starstruck. Betsy Brandt from Breaking Bad.
Was she
Aunt Marie?
Yeah,
Skyler's sister, Hank's wife.
She was funny. She was really good.
Yeah, she played my mom in Good Boys out at the Pasadena Playhouse.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. That was a little daunting for me at first, but I'm starting to. Oh, I forgot to mention this. In Streetlights, Queen Latifah. That one was definitely the.
Whoa.
I had my first scene on set was across from her, and
so that's when the Streetlights come on.
Yeah. And at first I was like, "What do I call her? Do I call her like Your Highness? Is it
Your Highness.
Queenie Tifa?" I had no idea, and it's actually La. She goes by La. She was so wonderful, so charming and goofy and all of that, but. Matthew Broderick is a idol for me, but Queen Latifah is this like icon status.
Yeah, she's like been more. I mean, Matthew Broderick's pretty pop culture with the Ferris Bueller.
Totally.
But Queen Latifah, like for instance, there's a place here in town that's on like 90s hip hop.
Yeah,
it's like a brunch spot with 90s hip hop. People have murals all over the wall. Like Queen Latifah has a mural on that wall of her. Like she's a big kind of American hip hop icon.
Yeah.
Plus being a great actor over the last 30 years.
Right. And, hosts America's Got Talent. I mean, people know who that is.
Right. All around the world.
Right. And there was this radiance to her that was I could almost feel this magnetic force pushing away from her because of her, grand stature as who she is. But for the most part, I'm really grateful that at this point in my career, I'm starting to find the confidence in myself to view myself as somebody who can come to the table as a contributor. I'm no longer, I think with Matthew and those guys, I was the college kid who was given a really great break and who did his job and got along with everybody and just had a great time. But now I feel like I'm coming into my own of viewing myself as, no, I'm an actor who's been hired to do this job just as you have, Miss Latifah. Not this
La. You call her La. You call her La.
Right. But if I were to say, and I've also never come up against, it's not like Queen Latifah ever made me feel like I was less than her or privileged to be in her presence, but you can create that reality in your own head.
For sure.
And I'm starting to view myself as a player in that way.
So what's next then?
It depends on when this comes out, if I can tell you, and when this podcast comes out. If
but you got stuff in the works.
Yes. I will be in New York for the next year, doing a new show.
Cool.
God, I wish I could tell you. Well, I'll just tell you, and then if it comes, you can edit this out. I'm going to be in. The creators of are doing a new show for in New York. I'm really excited, man. I've already had my dialect coaching. We're either going with like Midwestern Texan, like I just moved to New York, or I'm just going to go straight up Black Irish New York, like cup of coffee, stuff like that. I am over the moon. And so we start shooting that in March. We go March to August.
Congrats, man.
Thanks,
That's going to be really cool.
Thank you. I'm not allowed to announce it until, the press release comes out. But there was a moment I found out when I was up in Vancouver doing, and I sat in my hotel room chair and just cried. I was like, all right, Ben, you want to be an actor? Like, you got to prove it now. This is, you rise to the occasion level, do your research, hammer the dialect, be a fun, good person on set, because now you're in this is the NBA.
Right.
This is Shakespeare. I mean, this is our society's Royal Shakespeare Company.
Well, congrats.
Thank
I
you,
look
man.
forward to watching it.
Yeah.
We subscribe.
Oh,
so
wonderful,
we'll watch
wonderful.
It.
And I mean, it's from the creators of so it's like, all right, let's go.
Well, everybody's going to be watching what they're doing next. Well, Ben, as you know, as a big fan of the Moonlight Graham Show, the way we end every episode is with 5 big questions.
Yes, let's do it.
So, first question is, what's your dream role?
I want to play a high school quarterback in any classic high school movie that is a real full-fledged human being with actual problems. It's not just about the sports.
So like a Friday Night Lights type of quarterback role?
Yeah, but like real like I would prefer it to be like a based on a true story situation.
I was thinking like the movie Friday Night Lights.
I was going to say
so than
thank
the TV.
God, because I bring up Friday Night Lights and most people are meaning the TV show, but I'm
the
talking
Buzz
about
Bissinger.
the book and the
because the guy who played the quarterback on that Friday Night Lights one, he ended up being like he's on like a CSI show now. He's like a Cajun guy in New Orleans. He was on the Tokyo Drift.
Yes,
movie.
I forget his name.
Lucas something.
Right.
Lucas Black.
Right.
Lucas Black is his name.
Yeah, but yes,
he's really good.
I want to base on a real story. I'm almost writing one about Fort Dodge. Like I would love to center something. So maybe I'll say that my dream role is to play a fictionalized version of myself at Fort Dodge Senior High.
Here's an idea for you outside of football. You should make a Jerry Patterson movie. Oh, man. And it's like your own Field of Dreams, but it's about Fort Dodge. And right there is a picture of Patterson Field there. Because like, isn't Jerry Patterson kind of is Ray Kinsella?
Yes,
right.
Dude.
He's like the greatest guy ever. He made his own baseball field.
Man, we have so much rich. There are so many rich stories sitting in that town, and I'm hoping to tap into those very, very soon. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'm putting you in charge of that.
All right.
Make the Jerry Patterson movie.
All right.
Question 2. What's the most nervous you've ever been in your life?
The most nervous I've ever been in my life was the night before my first episode of The Village aired. I pride myself on being somebody who embraces fear. I like the unknown. I like all of that. The night before, Monday night, I was up with bone-chilling horror. I could not sleep. I was literally cold knowing that 4.6 million people were about to see my face and me doing something that I'm not that confident in.
But your work was already done.
I know, but the fact that people were going to see it was just terrifying. And to the point where Tuesday night when it aired, I wouldn't even watch it. My buddies and I went to the bar. I said, I'm going to watch it tomorrow on Hulu by myself in a dark room. And, I've never been more nervous in my entire life.
What was the reception like while that was going on? Was your phone blowing up?
Oh, my God. Yes. Yes. I was getting, watch party pictures and all of that. The support back home was just incredible. But I had to shut it off. I couldn't watch it.
Is there any role that you will not do?
I'll never do anything that's obviously I believe that there's a difference between telling stories that are outside yourself. Like, I don't want to limit myself to only experiences that I know, but making sure that I'm telling stories that are mine to tell. Like, I don't ever want to do, I forget. There's been numerous instances over the last few years of, a movie set about the Great Wall of China that stars a white guy. And I think it's time that we just, grow up about what we think is marketable and what we think is commercial, and start letting people in their own communities, especially for minorities who have been waiting so long to get their foot in the door, to rob them continually of being able to tell their own stories. That's where I would draw the line. But in terms of like content, whether it's playing a really, 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 really bad dude, or, having to do some pretty crazy stuff like jump off a building, or be, in my underwear or less on stage, given the right context and the right role and all of that, I want to rise to the occasion. So,
really?
Yeah.
Male frontal nudity.
Yeah.
You'll do it.
If it's necessary to the story, and it's a good story. I mean, all the other parts have to be. I will hold the standard just as I do with everything else.
Right.
But I would never let that be the deterrent.
Oh man,
Yeah.
you're a bigger man than I am.
I need it to scare me. I want things. If I ever don't get the butterflies, or if I ever feel like I'm doing something that's like smoking a cigarette and drinking a whiskey, this is easy and I've got it, then I know I'm in the wrong thing now. I always want it to make me have to push. I want to always push myself outside my comfort zone.
What are you most proud of?
I'm really, really, really proud of the work that my family's doing. Life is really, really hard, and it's hard to succeed in whatever you're trying to do. And the work ethic and the drive that I see in my family members is really inspiring to me. And I'm really, really proud to be in the same conversation as them. And being able to, and I really try to make sure that I fulfill my duties as a son, being the person who gets to leave the nest and go out to New York and live his dreams. You have to repay that. And so I come back as often as I can, and I'm really, really proud of my family, and I'm really, really proud of our town, to be honest. I think Fort Dodge is a pretty dope place. So.
Final question here, Ben, is what's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, that's a good question. Keep the main thing the main thing.
Coach Miller.
Yeah, man. Keep the main thing the main thing. And there's an analogy about Mount Everest. That so when you climb Mount Everest, you start at the base. First of all, you have to get to the base camp, which is too high. I don't even know the number. You have to get to the base camp, and then in order to reach the top, your trajectory goes. You go from the base camp to level 1 and back to the base camp. Then you go base camp to level 2 and then back to the base camp. Base camp to level 3, because you have to build up the altitude stamina. Once you go up to base camp to level 3, you camp there, and then hike that last. I'm just going to make up a number, like 600 feet. The amount of energy that it takes to get from Camp 3 to the peak, to the summit, it takes more energy expenditure to do that than the entire work that you've done the entire trip. And I think that that's a great metaphor for life in terms of leveling up, and how there is no rest, and there is no, once I get to this point, then I'll just chill. Or once, I want to in order to continually improve yourself, you actually have to work harder.
And also the last piece, which is the most differentiating piece, is the toughest.
Right.
Right. And you kind of mentioned that with singing and acting when you're at Michigan.
Right.
Right. It's like sometimes the last piece of becoming from really, really good, really elite to making a career out of it, or making it to the major leagues, or making it on Broadway, or getting on TV is the hard part, because there's a lot of people at level 3.
Right. Right. And some people are very happy there. And I do not knock them for not wanting to burn themselves out or have to do all that work to get to the summit. But I just don't really have any interest in sitting at level 3. So,
well, Ben, thank you. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Yeah,
We're flying out to New York City here in a couple of hours. So
yes.
Thanks for stopping by the studio.
Tim, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
You bet. Hey guys, thanks once again to listening to today's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. And even though I do most of the interviews here on the podcast, there is a ton of work that happens behind the scenes that you guys don't see that make each episode possible. So I got to give a shout out to the Moonlight Graham Show team. First of all, Brian Sandvig, our producer. Brian does all of the post-production work, and in real life, he's not just a podcast producer, he's also a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home down in the Kansas or Missouri areas, give Brian Sandvig a call. Next guy on that list is Brendan Gargano. Brendan does all of our design and artwork here on the podcast. He's one of the most talented artists I've ever met, and I love all of his work. If you need any help on the design side with logos or anything like that, give Brendan Gargano a call. The next guy on that list is Andy Flattery, my older brother. Andy, of course, has done some of the interviews here on the podcast. He also is a certified financial planner. He owns a business called Simple Wealth Planning. If you need any help in that area, check Andy Flattery out. And then, of course, the trusty co-host Tom Griffin and my younger brother Neil Flattery. Those guys are just busy being husbands, being fathers, they're family men, but also they do a ton of work here on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you guys subscribing and supporting the Moonlight Graham Show.